Welcome to the Company of Dads podcast, where we explore the sweet, silly, strange, and sublime aspects of being a lead dad in a world where men, who are the go-to parent, aren't always accepted at work, among their friends, or in the community for what they're doing. I'm your host, Paul Sullivan. Our podcast is just one of the many things we produce each week at the Company of Dads. We have various features, including the Lead Dad of the Week. We have our community, both online and in person. We have a new resource library for all fathers seeking answers. The one-stop shop to learn about all of this is our newsletter, The Dad. So sign up today at thecompanyofdads.com/thedad. Today, my guests are a father-son team, Kurt and Trent Long. Kurt and Trent are the co-founders of BUNKR, which is a digital vault that encrypts and stores passwords and documents. We're going to talk today about something a lot of parents who own businesses hope will happen, that their children will want to work with them. And that if they work with them, they'll grow together as a family, not just as business owners. The Longs also have a family foundation focused on mental health, which we'll touch on toward the end. Welcome, Kurt and Trent, to the Company of Dads podcast.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
Thanks for having us, Paul.
All right, Kurt, you're the dad, so you're going to get the first question. We're going to dial back into that way back machine, and I want you to tell people, not really related or maybe related to what you're doing now, but you had a pretty cool first job working at the Kennedy Space Center. I mean, next to being, a firefighter, I think a lot of kids want to hang out with astronauts or be an astronaut. How did that job at the Kennedy Space Center come about?
Yeah, that is the Wayback Machine. So when I was a child, you could see the Apollo launches all over the state of Florida. We lived in Florida, and you'd see the launches take place. And, a couple days later, you'd look on television and you'd literally see astronauts bounding across the moon. And so it was a very real thing. And I wrote the Space Center when I was 13 or 14, and they wrote back. Which meant a lot. It's like, wow, so this is a real place. Like I could work there. And so I held on to that. And then over time, as I graduated from the University of Florida, I still held out that maybe I could be involved in space in some way. And I wound up getting an interview there at the Space Center, and I got hired. And that was probably by far the most transformative professional experience of my life. And I was lucky enough to be involved with a group of people who treated each other like family. And that was a long time ago. And I remained friends with that entire group, for all of these years, all the way till now. So it became much more than just a first place to work. It became a pursuit I had the rest of my entrepreneurial career, which is, could I ever possibly recreate the family feel that those wonderful group of people at Kennedy Space Center gave me when I started out? It transformed the rest of my life.
I mean, no pressure on you, Trent. You've got to, recreate what a whole bunch of, famous astronauts did.
Yeah.
Before we bounce you, John, one question back, follow up on that, Kurt. I mean, that experience, we all have formative experiences in our careers that come at different points. Yours came at the very beginning. What did that teach you? What did that teach you as a business leader? But did it teach you anything as a father? You talked about the family feel at the Space Center.
Yeah, I had tactically, meaning I'll stay off the Space Center, the individual people. There were men and women in that group that could be both strong and even tough, but at the same time kind. So they could be both. They could be both tough and kind. And they had the wisdom as to know when to be tough on me, and I deserved it. I deserved to have some of those leaders ask more of me that I was giving, but at the same time, it never felt personal, and they would also help me. And I think that shaped parenting a good deal. And as I said, I stayed in touch with those people over the last 30 years and more. And so they've always shaped me in that way, strong and kind at the same time. And then as far as lessons learned from entrepreneurship, I'll just give you a couple. There's so many that translate, but I'll just give you two. The first is to have a vision for something bigger than yourself, something that seems unimaginable separately. We're going to launch Hubble Space Telescope, and at 200 miles above the Earth. We're going to put it in geosynchronous orbit, and it's going to stay there and take pictures of the universe for the next 35 years. I mean, it sounds outlandish. And that's much bigger than any one person can do. So it's like to be part of a team where the vision is way bigger than yourself, but that if we unite together, we can pretty much do anything we dream up. That's the first lesson that I got out of it. And not just hearing people talk about that, but live it. Like, you have to live it, not just get a lecture on it. Nobody gave lectures, you lived it. And then the second one is truth, is that, you have to become very comfortable with finding the truth, because everything has to be so exact. If you're wrong, things go really wrong. So you can't hide things. You have to reveal what the truth is, meaning, is this mission ready to go? Did we do our job perfectly as we worked in the data bank? Is the data bank 100% ready to support that mission? And if it's not, we're going to be accountable to all of our peers across the Space Center. So we better have this thing right. And we got to find the truth. Is it ready? And then as an entrepreneur, I felt like that translated. You can tell yourself whatever story you want, but your business is either working or it's not working. And you have to get comfortable hearing uncomfortable things that are true. So vision bigger than yourself, work as a team, and then, the truth finding process. Those are the two big takeaways.
All right, Trent, your dad growing up, tough or kind? What that's what he's talking about. Which one?
Both. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, obviously probably like every young man, they're going to say their mom was far kinder than their dad. Cause that's the reality of it. But yeah, we definitely, had eras where we had a lot of fun together. And there was other eras where, as a teenager, I deserved to get some tough lessons from dad. So that's for sure.
And what do I read into, Trent, that your first job was working for a privacy company? Were you really good at like hiding stuff from your dad when you were a kid? How does this come about as your first job out of college?
No, it's pretty funny that you asked that, because when I was in college, I was doing various jobs, everything from working as a dishwasher to stocking retail shelves on the 4 a.m. shift. I remember waking up at 3:30 to go to work, and my roommates were still awake from the night before, and I was going to work. And then ultimately, I wanted to chase a dream and become a professional fishing guide, and dabbled in that a little bit, and pretty quickly realized that I wanted a life that I could provide for my family, be around family, and really have that be the focus. So then I ended up working at Fair Warning, which was a company that was founded from Kurt, and started off at a very low totem pole there, and eventually worked my way up through the business, through hard work and experience, to running a whole team of cybersecurity analysts that use the Fair Warning software to essentially catch the bad guys inside of healthcare organizations, which is a whole explosion of a conversation I'm sure we can dive into. But that's kind of how I transitioned from going through college into kind of the first career step.
And when you say you work for a company that kind of your dad back, but that's different from co-founding,
Yes.
a company together. So I'll give you the first question, and then we'll see if your dad agrees. But how did it happen? How did this idea come about for BUNKR? How did you guys decide to do it together? Tell me the origin story.
So it's funny, during COVID, we were all locked down as the rest of the world was, and we started to, it was at a time where we, as a family, I'll speak for the family, we were transitioning from running the business Fair Warning together, the previous business, and having a lot of help with administrative aspects of our lives, people to do, a lot of these tasks throughout the day. And then all of that went away. then COVID started around that same time frame. And so as we were locked down and living more or less a digital life, we started to encounter some of these extremely frustrating challenges that you encounter, just living your life. It could be anything from, hey, I need to find an email attachment, but the thread is 22 emails long. And hey, this looks like an attachment. You click on it, it's a logo, and so as the very most basic example, stuff like that really frustrated us. And we started to think that, maybe there's got to be a better way to save time and give people time back in their day and eliminate those tech frustrations and protect people securely through our past experience of doing that within the healthcare system. So more or less, that's kind of the origin story of what inspired us to take on BUNKR. Is we wanted to solve these day-to-day challenges for people so that they could spend more time doing what they wanted to do, whether it's spend time with their families, whatever the case might be.
And I'll throw it out to either of you, but how did the decision get made that you would found the company together and really become, again, not just father-son, but business partners in BUNKR?
Yeah, that's another great question. So it's pretty funny. We actually founded the business with my brother as well, and my brother and I recruited Kurt more or less to help us found the business because we are very good at executing on the business aspects and doing the heavy lifting. But we knew that Kurt is able to say these sentences that are it could just be one sentence, but it's a profound sentence. And then we work really well together to translate that into execution and create that vision into a reality. So we recruited him into BUNKR.
How do you feel about that, Kurt, that your sons want you to just kind of keep it to one sentence? How does that feel?
A lot of pressure. You have to spend a lot of time thinking and not much time talking, apparently. But I would go back a little bit further, Paul, on the origin story of BUNKR, and that was we started Fair Warning when Trent Hobie's our other son had a huge role in BUNKR, but we founded Fair Warning while they were in school. And that business, and when I say we, Teresa, who's my Trent's mom, and my wife, we founded Fair Warning, and that business began growing, and we patented techniques to detect criminal activity around electronic health records. And we got the timing right on that. We were a little bit early, but it took off, and the business grew. We had customers all over the world. And we were building trust in the healthcare industry and catching bad guys at the same time. But we kind of translated that to patient care, that the more the patient could trust their care provider, the more they could share, the better treatment they could get. And in study after study, that turned out to be true. And so when Trent and Hobie joined Fair Warning, it was kind of that era after the housing bubble, and was that 2009, 2010, very choppy time. And I don't think any of us really thought we would all four work together in a business. It just seemed that did not seem like what would happen. But we did. And Teresa ran a really big part of the business. She was super important. And Trent, he's being a little bit humble about he did start at the bottom. And then we started a new division. And I remember a very talented first employee with a great education, and she chose to leave at that time, and you stepped up and said, hey, listen, I'll do it. And you stepped into that role, and that division grew into to be a very significant part of the business. Hobie had an amazingly important role in the business. He was more of my partner in communicating with the marketplace, and he and I were on the same page about everything. And we ran that together for many years. And so, Paul, when you kind of talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of running a business, I mean, all of us were in there. Then we hired all of our friends. Like they say, we said, well, gosh, these are some of the best people I know, and Trent's friends and Hobie's friends and our friends. So we had the building loaded with family and dear friends. And it was a very amazing and rewarding time. And we kind of pulled that off. Like we stayed friends with all those friends. And when we did sell the business, it kept getting bigger and bigger. And that meant more and more pressure on all the family. And it put a lot of pressure on my relationship with Teresa, because she was running a big part of it. And, I say the one sentence and everybody else makes that happen. Well, I'd come in and say my sentence once or twice a week, and, the rest of them, and then I was off doing fun stuff. And, that the distance grew between what the life I was living and what Teresa and Trent and Hobie were living. And it just became time to move on from that business, so we sold it. It had a very, very successful outcome for everybody involved. I wasn't thinking about starting another business. I was like, wow, I've had a long run here of 25 years of, startup entrepreneurship. And, the last 10 of those have been pretty fun because the business has a little size to it. We're making, doing really well and traveling the world. But that's not how fate played out. It's kind of, they wanted to do another business, and we knew what we had done in healthcare. We had transformed the industry to make it a safer, more trusted industry. And then to think that we would do that at a larger scale, was kind of intoxicating to say, well, listen, let's see if we can do that for people around the world. We've seen firsthand the negative impact of cybercrime and privacy breaches has on human beings. It's unbelievable how damaging these things are. And let's see if we can protect, whoever wants it. Let's see if we can protect the world who wants to be protected while giving them time back in the day. So that's kind of my fuller context of how that came together, Paul.
Yeah. Trent, were you, like if you go to work for a company and your parents aren't involved in it and you screw up, they can fire you, or you do something that'd be really harsh on you. What's the dynamic been like? Because I think this is something that really resonate with a lot of, parent-child business is, and, you take it over, and there are a lot of benefits to it, but there are a lot of, risks, because at the end of the day, you love each other. You're not, and if you were to work at, Microsoft, you wouldn't necessarily love your manager. It's just not how it works out. So what are some of the things you think about that were great things you learned either intuitively or the hard way that would be lessons for other adult children who may go and work in a family business?
What a wonderful question. I actually, one of my best friends reached out to me in the last year and asked me, he said, hey, I'm thinking about leaving my current job and joining my dad's company, which he's been running for 20 years. What are the pros and cons, essentially? And we had a really long conversation, but it's essentially the same thing that you asked us here, or asked me here is, there are pros and cons. The pros are that you are in an environment where the people who you're working for, whether you're directly working for your family or you're just part of the business, that you're working for a leader and a boss who truly want they have your best interests at heart. And that's very hard to find because, generally speaking, you're a worker and your boss is trying to execute on their job and you're part of that. And but when you are part of the family business, you can put your whole heart and soul into it, because the harder you work and the more you give of yourself, you're giving it to your family. I mean, your mom and your dad raised you and gave so much to bring you into the world that it really does feel good to just pour yourself into the business and give everything that you can to try to benefit everyone involved. And so there's a great alignment there where they want the best for you and you are truly wanting the best for the business, for the sake of your family. And then, there are other pros as well where, you are you're in a place where you can be pushed and challenged, which is another thing that, you know, is kind of foundational to having meaning in the work that you're doing. Is you want to be challenged and you want to be pushed to your limits. And you know, working with Kurt, I'll just say working with Kurt, you know, he was able to always push me further than I thought was possible. Maybe that came from, you know, his experience at the Space Center with him getting pushed by his leaders. But then, you know, there are different aspects that are challenging. You know, you mentioned, you know, you may make a mistake at Microsoft and get fired. Would the same thing happen in the family business? I would argue that you know, the consequences are far worse at a family business, because first of all, you can't make a mistake like that. You know, you can't you're going to hear about it no matter what. So, you know, I always found myself holding myself to a much higher standard than I would working at another job, because you care so much more, and you don't want to disappoint. You want to have, you know, you want to deliver the best result that you can. So yeah, no mistakes are allowed. And you know, it's you just are put in a position where you are, you know, you just don't want to disappoint. And you know, for some people, maybe they have a little too much of that. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can have you know, a father-son relationship. I'll just say in this case, you know, some people really want, you know, desperately are seeking for approval, and others are wanting to just push themselves as much as they can in their own personal career. So there's a lot of different flavors to it. But ultimately there are pros and cons to it. And I would say that the one piece of advice I would have to maybe a young person considering moving into the family business is listen, if you have some kind of a family dynamic that is an underlying issue, you've got to resolve that before you jump in, because it's gonna rear its head. And I know that's not maybe painting the prettiest picture, but that's the reality. I mean, you're going to be working with your family every day, and not every second of the day are you going to be talking about work stuff. I mean, the personal stuff is going to come up. So you have to have a really solid foundational relationship with the people that you're working with in order to wholeheartedly jump into it, in my opinion. So hopefully that answered your question. That was a long-winded way of saying
it was a great answer. It was a great answer. But come on, Trent, you know, the listeners want to tell the truth. At any point have you gone to your mom and said, "Can you believe what Dad just did?" You know, at any point, like, Dad's one sentence this week was bonkers.
Well, it's really funny because, you know, people have a really segregated work and personal life. And for us, you know, it's all mixed together. And so you try so hard to not do that at work. You know, Mom, what in the world? Can you believe what he did? What, you know, in this meeting? I don't know, you know, but, you know, what we found worked really well for us is to establish, and I think this is a really important point, at least for us. There's many different ways to do it, but for us, what we really tried to do is keep the work issues at work and keep the personal stuff at home or at lunch or what have you. And one of the things that I think was really important was I never called Kurt and Teresa my mom and dad at work ever. Because what would end up happening is your coworkers would start saying, "Hey, your dad, hey, your mom," and it does not feel right when you are in a meeting and somebody refers to the CEO of the business and the founder of the business as your dad. You have to delineate that aspect of your life, in my opinion. And so we worked really hard on saying Kurt and Teresa and mom and dad at home. And so, you know, with that, you know, we could do the complaining about mom and dad at home, but at work it was, "Yes, sir." You know, Kurt said something, "Let's go do it." "Yes, sir." But behind the scenes at home, maybe my mom and I went to lunch. Maybe we could say the other part. So I found that to be a very, that was a hard learned lesson of figuring out how to segregate that aspect of your life into Kurt and Teresa and mom and dad. And then how do you intermix them? it's a strange dynamic, but it's that's what I found to be the most healthy.
I love this image that I've just painted in my head. This is probably completely false, but of you like at dinner with your dad. He said, "Dad, can you believe what Kurt did today?" I mean, that was just nuts.
That's good.
Now, Kurt, let me turn it to you because I've got 3 daughters. They're much younger than your sons. They're 6, 11, and 14. But my 14-year-old, you know, she's a young woman. She's, you know, as tall as her mom is now, and she's going out with friends. She's having a wonderful time. But I can remember, you know, she's 5'6" now, 5'5.5" or something like that. 5'6". But I can remember when she was born, and I could hold her in sort of the crux of my arm. Like her head would be in the palm of my hand, and her legs would be in the bend of my elbow. And I have that image. I'll never lose that image. And of course, you know, as a dad, you have that image of Trent, you have that image of your sons, and you have all the other things along the way. You know, as Trent said, perhaps when he was a teenager, he was a typical teenage boy, and he needed, you know, a little tough love. But at what point, and this is important for sort of, you know, fathers who will become partners or bosses of their children. At what point were you able to say, okay, this is my son. I love him dearly. I've known him his entire life. He's in his 30s now, but I am now going to look at him as fill in the blank, as a worker, as an employee, as a future owner of this company. How did that transition come about for you?
It was, to be forthright, at some age that let's say the adolescence part goes away, so they're mature enough, you can at least view them as an adult. You know, if they're still doing some adolescent things, that complicates it. But let's say they've got to pass that point, and by adolescent, maybe they got in trouble at school, or maybe they had this complication in their life that's immature. So I'm assuming a certain level of maturity that they have to reach before what I'm about to say applies. Is I've always been, maybe it goes back to the Space Center, I'm not sure, but I've always been kind of purpose driven, and I've loved my profession my whole life. I never, you know, I just loved almost every single minute of my career, whether it was working at the Space Center, whether it was at IBM for a couple of years, or whether it's been building businesses. So when I go to work, I mean, I'm there with purpose. And so in building a business, you've got a vision, you've got purpose, and then you're just looking for great teammates. It comes down to, I don't care who they are. I don't care what they look like. I don't care who they are. It's where's the talent, and how do we combine talent together to accomplish the journey? And that comes down to, can I see the strengths in individual people, not necessarily their weaknesses. It's always easy to find weakness. I'm interested in strengths, because I want to combine strengths with strengths, you know, complementary strengths. So as soon as they enter that workplace, for me, I'm looking at my sons, I'm looking at everybody in the building. Where are your strengths? How can I put you in a position to utilize your strengths all day, every day? And I don't really care about anything else. So it's like all that other stuff washes out, you know. So I could look at Trent and say, wow, this guy is an incredibly calm person that executes. Some people call that you know, the silent assassin type, but people respond to him, and his teams get things done without any drama whatsoever, and he seems to hire the right people, and he makes it look easy. My other son, visionary, creative, incredibly talented at the written and spoken word. You know, 2 really different kids, 2 really different adults, I should say, but equally talented. Identify the strength, put them in a position to execute on that strength, help us get to the mission, and all the rest is kind of a detail. I really don't care. In fact, if it's a distraction from what we're trying to do, I have to be snapped out of it and go work on that, Paul. So that's just how I think about things. And I've always been like that. I've always loved what I do.
This has been great, guys. Thanks for your time today. You know, one last question I'll throw, either of you can answer, you both can answer, but you know, I've read, you know, Kurt, you talk about business as a force for good, which is inspiring, kind of brings everything together. But how did the family foundation come about, focused on mental and spiritual health? How did that start, and what's the goal for the foundation?
Yeah, I'll start with the goal first. The goal is to obviously have an impact on, really we focus in on, it's going to focus in usually on young kids, so it could be a thing like Feeding Tampa Bay Metropolitan Ministries. And as an example, Metropolitan Ministries takes care of homeless families, where you could say whatever you want about homeless people, but a homeless child, they didn't do anything. I mean, they didn't make that decision. They just got there. So you're kind of like, wow, they need a helping hand, or Inspiring Children out of Las Vegas, or Big Change out of the UK that we work with. All those organizations are focused in on trying to help kids get off to a great start. And obviously we're going to want to have the biggest impact we can. And in some cases, limited cases, participate in that impact with our own time and effort. Usually it's financial contribution. And the way it got started this is several years ago. I was observing say 5-6 years ago, you kind of had this idea that sustainable Earth was a really big deal, and that we better figure out how we sustain the planet. And Paul, my view on that changed, not to say that that's not important, because it remains important, but human beings have like the biggest impact on Earth. And if we're not well, if human beings aren't well, we're going to make bad decisions, and we're going to impact each other, and we're going to impact this planet. So it kind of became more basic than that was, well, gosh, let's see if we could contribute to human beings being well spiritually and mentally. And that would lead to better decisions and make the world a more sustainable place. And that was the thinking process that we went through. And that happened over time.
Fantastic. Kurt and Trent Long, thank you again for joining me on the Company of Dads podcast. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks for having us, Paul. Hopefully this will paint a picture of what it's like to work together a little bit for somebody out there.
It certainly will. It's been great.
Take care, Paul. Thanks a lot. It was great.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Company of Dads podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in week after week. Just want to use this moment here to thank the people who make it possible. Number one, of course, Helder Mira, who is our podcast editor. We also have Skip Cherryholmes, who many of you know from the Lead Dad Diaries. He's taken over our social media. Terry Brennan is helping us with our audience development, and Emily Servin is there each and every day helping with the web development. I can't do any of this without an amazing board of advisors. So I just want to say thank you to all of you who help, and I want to say thank you to everyone who listens, and hopefully you'll tune in again next week. Thanks so much.